Hello, everybody. My name is Jake Hebert. Once again, welcome to my Financial Freedom channel here. Today we're going to talk a little bit about investing in terms of strategy or rules or things like that. So there's three key principles when it comes time to investing that we are going to talk about over the next couple of weeks, maybe a month or so. And so I'm gonna break them all down. I'm gonna do just one of the three today. And the one of the biggest things I get asked all the time is how do you manage the downside? How do you manage risk? Maybe that's a better way to put it. How do you because we know that and again we're going to talk about mutual funds in terms of investing. There's other things we could talk about, all kinds of different strategies. We're going to talk about investing in terms of mutual funds. Um, and the reason that is because that makes the most amount of sense for what we're going to talk about. Anyway, so I get asked all the time. We know that mutual funds go up, they go down in value. So how do you manage that? What do you do so that your money isn't at risk for devaluing too much? And there are three things that I teach people when you're investing that you have to be aware of, that you have to know how they work. You have to understand them. So beware, understand, and then use them. You have to do it that way. And so the one we're going to talk about today is called dollar cost averaging. When I first heard of this, I was blown away by it. It was unbelievably simple, but it was very effective over the long period of time. Again, we're going to talk about a investing strategies in terms of long-term investing, not short-term for the if you're into short-term investing into real estate, into index funds, ETFs, all this other stuff, cryptocurrencies. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about long-term investing for wealth generation and producing wealth. Okay, so we're not talking about speculation. We're not talking about any of that. We're talking about strategic investing today. Um, and this applies to however you decide to invest. But for this video specifically, we're going to talk about mutual funds. So in a mutual fund, we all know that you buy a share into the mutual fund, which I'll talk about in another video, how to explain why that is and how that works. But we're going to talk specifically about buying shares into a mutual fund. And so again, we've got, let's say we've got John over here, and John and I have talked about the exact mutual fund portfolio that we're going to use for his specific risk assessment, everything else that we've done for John. So we know the mutual fund portfolio. You can use this in an RRSP, you can use it in an RESP, you can use it in a tax-free savings account, the TFSA. You can use it in any one of those mutual fund portfolios as long as you've got a good fund portfolio put together and how you can take advantage of it. So that's what we're going to talk a little bit about today. So the one I'm going to talk about today is called dollar cost averaging, DCA. Simple, effective, and it makes a big difference in the long term. So what we're talking about is wealth generation for the long run. So let's look at the board and we'll show you what we're talking about. So let's say we had John over here, and John has $400 he wants to invest. This is what we're going to talk about today. And John and I have talked about his mutual fund portfolio. We've talked about everything else. And when I talk about investing, I talk about doing it periodically. So when I talk about investing, I talk about doing it in periods of time. So we're talking about weekly, we're talking about monthly, we're talking about bi-weekly, one of those three. There you can do quarterly, semi-annually, and annually. And so we've got John here, he's got $400. Rather than investing it once and just seeing what happens, um, John's going to start investing $100 per month. And that's key, is that you do it every single month or every single week, depending on how what you feel comfortable with and how you set it up for yourself. But in this scenario, we're going to get John to invest every single month. He's got $400, so we're going to invest $100 every month for 4 months. Okay, so we've got 4 months here. That there, month 1, month 2, month 3, and month 4. And we've got $100 here, $100 here, $100 here, and $100 here. So he's going to do that instead of doing it every single, just once a year, he's going to do that. Now, when I show John a couple of charts, now I always look at mutual fund portfolios, and one of the ways that I look at mutual fund portfolios and I show them to clients or people that are looking to invest, one of the ways that I show it to them is I show them historical returns of this fund, so they have an expectation of this fund has this much volatility in it. It's got this much risk, and those are two separate things. We'll talk about that in another video. Risk and volatility are not the same thing, but it's got this much volatility in it. And based on historical volatility, we are able to predict a little bit what it may do in the future as long as the fund manager stays the same and the investing principles and strategies in that fund stay the same, right? And so if I show John two charts here, and I'm going to just draw them out here, but if I show John two charts here, let's say we have market A and we have market B. And so if I look at this chart and I go market A does this and market B does this, 90% of people look at that and I say, which one would you choose? Just looking at the investment strategy. 90% of people say market A. And what I want to talk about is why we should take a look at market B. Not necessarily we should always choose market B, but why we should take a look at market B, depending on your investment strategy and your volatility, what you can carry. So we're going to draw a line down here, and we've got market A, and we have market B. And let's say we had John invest in market A. He invested the $100, and let's say that they both started out at $10 a share. And as we talked about, when you invest into a mutual fund, you're buying shares. That means that market A would buy John 10 shares. He spent the $100, and in market B would also buy John 10 shares. Now, because we talked about investing into a mutual fund, you're buying shares. So he invests the $100, $10 a share, buys him 10 shares. He invests into market B, also buys him 10 shares. Now in the second month, still invests the $100. And let's say that these shares had gone up all the way to $15 a share. And let's say that these had dropped all the way down to $5 a share. That means that in market A, John would have bought 6.6, whatever that is, 6.661, I think, shares. And if he had invested in market B, he would have bought 20 shares. So let's go all the way to the third month. Here, John is still investing $100. And let's say that these had gone up all the way to $20 a share, doing phenomenal well, just very happy. And John would buy another 5 shares. And let's say that John had invested in market B, and these dropped all the way down to $2 a share. Very, very sad in month 3. But John still invests the $100 because he had committed to it, and he buys 50 shares. And let's say that in month 4, still invests the $100. And let's say that if they had gone up all the way to $25 a share, $25 a share, very happy with their rates of return, invests $100, he buys another 4 shares because they are up at 25. And let's say that these had returned back around and they were up at $10 a share again where they started. Now both of these funds would send a statement in the mail. This one would show, and you can correct me on the math, but I think it would be right around 160%, maybe not quite. It'd be right around that 160%. This one would show 0% because we started at 100, or sorry, we started at $10, we ended at $10. This one started at 10, ended up at 25. Now at $10 a share, oh, we got to finish our buying our shares down here. He would have bought another 10 shares. Okay, so what we have here is 2 funds. And let's go back up over here. We have market A and we have market B. In market A, we know that he owns 10 and 26.6 shares. Market A, he bought 26.6 shares. And what are they worth? What are the shares worth now? Well, We know that they're worth $25, right? Because they bought the fund and it was $10, 15, 20, and 25. All of these shares are now worth $25. That means that um, he would have about $641, give or take. Not quite accurate, but it'd be about 641 bucks. $400 turned into $641. Pretty good rate of return. Very good rate of return. Now let's look at market B. He had 10, 30, and 50 is 80, and 10, he's bought 90 shares. And what are they worth? Well, these shares over here were $10. They dropped in value and they came back up to $10 a share. They're worth, all of them are worth 10 bucks a share. That means that John in market B would have had $900 when it was all said and done. So there is $241 made here, and there's $500 made here with a 0% rate of return. That's very important to know and to understand. So what happens is, in order to understand what just happened there, and we'll go back to the chart in a minute, but is to buy shares every single month. We know already that mutual funds, they tend to fluctuate. They do. We know that because of history. We look back at the last 100 years, 150 years, as far back as we want to look. A good mutual fund that has good growth in it, that 9, 10, 12, 15%, always fluctuates in value. Some years goes down, some months goes down, it fluctuates, it goes up and down. It has volatility in it. Okay? And so what I try and tell people and what I try and teach people, what we all have to do is we have to figure out how do we take advantage of it. Now, these kinds of returns, as I just showed here, in the real world, we don't get that, okay? So this is not, I'm not promising this kind of returns. I really am not. So please understand what I'm trying to say. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to teach a principle. So the average fund that if you decided to invest your money in at the beginning of the year, every single year, and if we had another investor that invested every month or every week throughout the year for the rest of their life, say, or until they turn 65 and they decide to live on the pension or whatever, they return between 1 and 3% per year more than the investor that does it once a year. Now you say, well, what's 1 and 3%? 1 to 3%. Well, let's say that we had a mutual fund and I invested 150, or let's just say $200 every single month for say 25 years. I may have somewhere, and I didn't do the math on this, I may have somewhere, let's just say it was $1.5 million when I turned 65. If I do dollar cost averaging like this, and I take advantage of the dips because we already know there's going to be dips, if I take advantage of it, but we don't know when, right? Very important to understand. We don't know when the dips are going to be. We know they're coming. We don't know when. So very, very important to understand. So if I were able to even return an extra 2% per year on average, that would change that $1.5 million all the way up to probably about 1.8 or $1.9 million. Now, that is why I say that's $200,000 to $300,000 over a long period of time. So 3 things. 1, we talked about long-term wealth building. This isn't for short-term stuff. If you're saving up money to buy a living room set, if you're saving up money to buy a house, you're saving up money to buy a car, this, you can still do it, but understand that it's going to be a different group of funds that we're going to use for that. Okay, very, very important to understand. So for long-term, for intergenerational wealth building, this strategy works. It makes a huge difference. 2, 3, 4, even $500,000 difference over 25 years is huge. It is a lot of money. So somewhere between 1 and 3% per year more if we dollar cost average. Now again, back to the board here for a second. Are we going to see shares go from $10 down to $2 and up to $10 again in 4 months? No, we're not going to see that, or very unlikely, I should say. That's a very unlikely scenario. Are we going to see share prices go from 10 to 20 over a 4-month period of time? Very, very unlikely scenario. But we will see over the average 1 to 3% per year more rates of return, higher rates of return than the person that just takes the $400 and invests it here and then leaves it there. The other reason this is easy to do is because it allows people to budget and it allows people to plan. If we go throughout the year and we say we're going to save up $10,000 to invest at the end of the year, or let's even go with a smaller number and say six. If I said to the average person, can you invest $6,000 this year? They would say, that's going to be hard for me to save that up if I'm making 45 or 50, or even let's say $70,000 a year. The average person is going to say that's very hard. But the average person spends that on a vehicle, or even more. The average car payment, and I'll have to double check this, but very often I see them at $500 and $600 a month. Well, $6,000 a year is $500 a month. So it does three things. It allows us to grow our wealth more. It allows us discipline. It allows us to plan. It allows us to budget. It allows us to figure out our finances. And it also, most importantly, it gives us growth. It gives us the growth that we need. So yeah, that's one of the things. That's one of the three rules. We'll talk about the other two at another time. For now, we'll leave it there. Thank you for watching. Hit subscribe on that channel, and we'll talk to you next time.